one of the coolest things about having a channel on YouTube is I get to meet people from all over the world. And quite often I only meet them via the internet, email back and forth or messages and so on. But the cool thing is a little while back, I got a note from a guy who said, Steve, I'm in a band that tours the world. I'm from England, but the band is from Australia. And we come to Michigan occasionally. And if we're ever in Michigan, would you like to see us play? I said, I'd love to. I love going to see live shows. I love the rock and roll. I see quite a few shows. And I said, I'd love to. And he sent me originally a note last year. His name is Dave. And unfortunately, there's a conflict where I could not see him and his band when they came to town because of the fact I was out of town that weekend. And I'm like, so sorry, I can't come see you. Please, next time you're in town, let me know. And a couple weeks ago, I got a note. Hey, Steve, we're going to be in Detroit at the music hall. Would you like to come see us play? I said, I'd love to. I'd absolutely love to. And so this past weekend on Sunday night, went and saw the Australian Pink Floyd show. And now the last couple of days on the set, I've had this Pink All Access pass sitting right there where I'll put it after I shoot this video. And the reason I've got this is because I went to the show, met Dave, met the band, hung out with them beforehand, hung out with them between sets, and then sat and talked to Dave until the wee hours of the morning and had one of the greatest times of my life. And so here's the deal. I know some people in the audience might not be gigantic Pink Floyd fans, and some people in the audience might not be big fans of live music. But Pink Floyd, for those of you who are roughly my age, understand how important they were to music, especially because of the three primary albums that most of us have heard every single track off of: Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and of course, The Wall. And that was the soundtrack of FM radio in America, especially the album rock stations. But some of those songs were big hits that got played on the top 40 stations and the CHR stations. And, and so you've heard these songs so much that they're ingrained in your memory. And so back in 1988, some guys got together in Australia and put together a band that their goal was to recreate the sound of Pink Floyd on the stage. Now, Pink Floyd's a fascinating band. They've got a great history to them. I'm not going to get heavily into that because that's not what this video is about. But Pink Floyd's music, if you listen to it, one of my brothers bought Dark Side of the Moon when it came out. I remember hearing that just over and over and over again for years. And it's extremely complex music in terms of how it's recorded. And so you might think of all the bands you could choose to try to reproduce the sound of on stage, Pink Floyd would be a real mighty tall task to take on. But they took it on. The band was formed in 1988. It's called the Australian Pink Floyd Show, technically. But they go by Aussie Pink Floyd. And in fact, AussieFloyd.com is their website. And they're formed in 88. And Dave Fowler, who is one of the guitar players in the band now, he's been with them, I think, 14 years, he said, that he's from England. And so are a bunch of the other players. And I said, how'd that happen? And he said, well, it's the interesting thing. Aussie Pink Floyd got together in Australia, toured in Australia, and then they also toured elsewhere. And it turns out that they were doing so well elsewhere that they just started touring worldwide. They tour America, they tour England, they've toured, they've been to Russia. I mean, they've played a lot of different places. And so along the way, some of the original members have left, other people have joined, and Dave Fowler somewhere came along the line and joined the band. He's been with them for 14 years. Other players have come and gone. And so the thing is that he goes, hey, if you want to, you can come down early. And when we're done with the sound check, he goes, I'll give you a tour. I said, I would love that. I'm fascinated by this because I've been to so many shows where I was sitting in the nosebleeds wondering what's happening on stage. I've always wondered, what would it be like on stage? So I got down there. I texted him when I got near the theater. He said, come back to the stage door. And one of the security people will give you passes to get you in. So go back to the stage door. There's a guy. He goes, hey, you Steve Lehto? I said, yes, I am. He said, here you go. And hands me the pass. And so go inside. The band is still doing the sound check. I look out on the stage. There's Dave. There's a bunch of other band members. And standing off the side is a guy named Chris, who is one of the two singers. And he introduces himself. He goes, "Oh, you must be Dave's friend Steve. Nice to meet you. I'm Chris." We had a little discussion there. And we're standing by the mixing console on the stage. And of course, there's a mixing console for the house back behind where the people sit, the audience, I guess you'd call them. And it's so cool. So they finish the sound check. Dave comes over, introduces himself. I'm like, "Hey, dude, it's so nice to meet you. We've been corresponding for a year, and I'm really looking forward to this show." And he goes, "Well, let me show you around." He goes, "What would you like to see?" I go, "Dude, show me everything." So he showed me his spot on the stage where he's got his rig set up and a couple guitars. And I know a little tiny bit about guitars because I've got brothers who are guitar players. And he's got a couple Telecasters out there, and he's got, a couple Gibsons backstage. And he showed me where his rack of guitars was. Because during the show, like many other musicians, there's a tech coming out and swapping guitars with him between songs, occasionally during songs. And so he's got this whole setup. And he shows me the system on the floor that controls all his pedals and effects and stuff. It's just so cool to see all this stuff. And then, of course, we walk around. He shows me, the keyboard setup, and he shows me the drums, and shows me the other guitar guys setup, and it's just cool. And so I start talking to him. I'm like, I knew a guy who was in a Beatles cover band, Beatles, okay? And so that's four guys on stage, and my friend, they actually wore the wigs and the outfits and all that stuff, and they tried to recreate the sound of the Beatles. And I assume that that's got to be a little easier than recreating the sound of Dark Side of the Moon, for instance, on stage. And these guys, over the years, have gone through those albums and analyzed them and figured out exactly how to reproduce that sound on stage. And so they've also got other people on stage. I think they've got, they got two guitars, bass player, keyboard player, drums. Occasionally a sax player would come out. They got two vocalists. One plays bass, one just sings. Then they've also got three women backup singers. And if you're familiar with Dark Side of the Moon, there's some songs where there's some backup vocals that are wordless, but they are so important to the sound of the music that without it, the songs wouldn't work. And I was curious about that when I first heard that, we have a tribute we do to Pink Floyd, is how do you recreate that? Oh, no, they recreate it. They actually bring people out who do that, and including one of the people I met was Lorelei. Lorelei is one of the three backup singers, and she actually toured with Pink Floyd. She's toured with the Rolling Stones, and I got to talk to her for a while, and she was telling these stories about her time touring with Rolling Stones. And Dave, my friend, said, by the way, he goes, I was at one of the Rolling Stones shows where she sang backup back in the day before he was a professional guitar player. What are the odds these paths are crossing like that? So anyways, got the whole tour of the place. I jokingly made a comment about the tour bus. He goes, "Oh, you want to see a tour bus?" They've got more than one, by the way. And we walk out the parking lot, and there's tour buses and trucks and stuff. I go, "You guys have got quite an operation here." I go, number one, how many people are on stage making music? And he goes, generally speaking, 10. And I go, okay. How many people are on the crew? He goes, well, by the time all is said and done, it's 29. So there's 10 people on stage, the musicians, and then the sound people and the roadie people and the truck drivers and the bus drivers, 29 people in the organization that pulls up to do a show. And I'm walking around the stage looking at all the cabling and the wires, and again, I'm fascinated by this stuff. And I go, how long does this take to set up? And he goes, well, we got here, started unloading about 9 a.m. And he turns to one of the guys, he goes, when were we done? And the guy goes, about 3 o'clock. 6 hours. 6 hours to set everything up and get it ready to go. So they did the sound check. That's when I showed up, got the tour, saw the mixing console, got the tour of the whole place. And then he showed us downstairs, the backstage area, which is downstairs. And he said, by the way, he goes, Steve, that pink pass you got there, he goes, you got tickets out front at will call if you want to sit in seats during the show. He goes, but that pass right there is good. It'll get you basically anywhere in the building. It's like a get out of jail free card. He goes, so during intermission, if you want to, come on downstairs and we'll hang out for the 20 minutes between sets. So it's kind of cool. But just to understand how good these guys are, they were formed in 1988. And by 1996, they were very, very well known. And at one point in time, David Gilmour himself hired them to play his birthday party. Now, I don't know if that's going to quite sink in the way it ought to with everybody. But when you are in a band that pays tribute to a band, when one of the band members hires you to play his birthday party, that's a pretty good endorsement, okay? And so I'm also fascinated meeting people who performed around the world. And I was asking about different places he played and the audiences and the reactions. And I said, for instance, I go, have you guys ever played Glastonbury? And he goes, yeah, back in 1998, we played Glastonbury. And he goes, but we've played in, festivals and so on around the world in front of 10, 20, 30,000 people. But they've got a very, very grueling schedule where they played in Detroit, and then 2 days later they're playing in Toronto, and 2 days later they're playing someplace else. And keep in mind that between Detroit and Toronto is an international border that you got to get all those trucks and buses through. Okay, so it's a life on the road. It's an amazing thing that these guys people are doing. So I'm going to put some photos up while I'm talking, which I may have already been doing. I might have done that already. I don't know if I've edited that portion of the video yet, so we'll see where the pictures come in. But so Dave is the guitar player who's in the far right of the stage from the audience's perspective, and he's the guy that I hung out with. Lorelei is a singer, and she's in one of the pictures with me and Dave, and she, like I said, had the great stories. And the other two singers are Emily and Laura, the backup singers, and those three really, really blew me away. And like I said, without them, the music wouldn't have sounded complete. There's a bass player named Ricky who also sings, and Chris is the other singer. And then David plays keyboards, and I met a few other people, but it's amazing how good these guys are and gals, and how well they replicate the sound. Now, I know some of you are saying, Steve, describing music, talking about music, as they say, is like dancing about architecture. Oh, you can go to YouTube and type in Aussie Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here. And you can find a video of them doing that just a couple years ago with many of the same people I saw at the show I watched. And so my good friend Dave is over there on guitar, the acoustic guitar, opening up the song Wish You Were Here. Listen to it. And I challenge you to compare it to the original. And then find their version of Time, which has got that really cool intro. And again, compare it to the original. And it's flawless. It's impeccable. And the other thing is they've also got the big screen behind them that's doing multimedia stuff during the show. That's also quite entertaining. And in fact, they have a mascot. Of course, it's a kangaroo. He's pink and inflatable. And towards the end of the show, this giant kangaroo, Skippy, makes an appearance on stage for the end of the show. But they came out, they did a set of 15 songs. 15 songs. Then they took a break. During the break, I went backstage, hung out with Dave downstairs. I don't want to be in the way, but he's like, hey, how's it going? How you enjoying the show? Like, dude, this is blowing me away. It really is. Hung out with him, and then somebody stuck their head in the door, like, hey, guys, we're on stage, a couple minutes. So I went back up, got in my seat, and then they came back out and did 10 songs. And they did every single song that I knew by Pink Floyd. They did. It wasn't one of those shows where I'm like, hey, when are they going to do that one song? Wait, they didn't do the song I like. No. They did them. They did all the songs you like. And so everything, that you'd recognize from largely from those three albums, Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and The Wall. But they did stuff also like off of Division Bell. And I will admit, they did a song off Division Bell I was unfamiliar with. I'm like, whoa, I like this song. Where'd that come from? Turns out it was off of Division Bell. And I was not that familiar because it didn't get as much airplay as, like, say, Dark Side of the Moon, the album. So did 10 more songs. And what's interesting is I've seen tribute shows where the band comes out, plays the music, but also tries to imitate like the mannerisms and the speech patterns and stuff of the band members. And these guys came out, and I think they were 7 or 8 songs into their first set before anybody spoke. And Chris, the lead singer, simply said something to the effect of, "Good evening, welcome. I hope you like Pink Floyd." something like that. And I apologize. I know that's not exactly what he said. But it was very, very concise and just went right back to playing. They were there to play the music, not to pretend that they are other people. And it was so cool. And the audience loved it. And I'm raving about it. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday about this for about 20 minutes. My friend Tom, who's a musician. I'd been sending him pictures and so on. And I go, "Tom, I feel like I'm like that 8-year-old kid who just saw a movie for the first time, like the first movie he ever saw, and is still babbling about it 3 days later. And did you see the robot picked up a rock and threw it?" I've been to shows. I've been to hundreds of shows in my life. And this was one of the coolest experiences. I've been backstage at shows before too. I have been. And it was so neat. I mean, literally walking around on the stage before the show, looking out at the audience going, okay, this is the view they've got, except it's a packed house. But seeing all the equipment, and I've watched shows before, and I see the techs running on and off with the guitars, and I see the guitar player messing with the pedals. But it's a little different when you go up and look at it and see it and go, oh, this stuff controls this stuff all goes into that board, And they threw some numbers at me, which I don't even remember now, about how many inputs were going into that mixing console. And then how many outputs there were, because, for instance, the in-ear monitors they're wearing, each of them, and so on. And one of the coolest things, I'm going to mention this, I'm not sure if how conscious of an effort this is, but I think it must have been. But whenever there was somebody playing, like let's suppose, the beginning of Wish You Were Here, it starts with a guitar, acoustic guitar. Dave is playing that. The entire stage is dark and a spotlight comes on and lights him up. And then Luke, the other guitar player, joins him in a bit. And now a spotlight comes on him and says 2 spotlights on stage. The other people aren't standing in darkness. They're not on stage. Many of the songs they were playing, if somebody wasn't playing in a part, they wouldn't just stand there. They would literally back up and disappear. And it changes the way it feels. It's kind of it's one of those things. I think it's probably a lot of people subconsciously would spot it. But I'm so used to seeing shows where somebody's doing a guitar solo and there's 3 people standing there watching them on stage. I've been to an Allman Brothers show where there's 2 drummers going at it for half an hour and people wandering on and off stage. And it's a really interesting thing because your attention is drawn entirely to whoever it is you're supposed to be watching. And so on the songs where the female backup singers weren't singing, they weren't on stage. They were literally not on stage. And then when it approaches the part of the song where they are going to be singing, all of a sudden you see them walk out of the shadows, step up the mics, and start singing. So I can't rave enough. And if you get the opportunity, if they come any place near you, they tour worldwide. Check out their website. It is AussieFloyd.com. They're on Facebook. You can follow them on Facebook. And again, I'm not being paid to say this or anything. I just went and had the time of my life watching this show. And I was absolutely, utterly blown away by them. And yes, people sat down and deconstructed those albums and asked, how can we recreate that sound live? And I'm not a musician, and I got friends who are, and I've been to enough shows to know that what these guys do is perfection. And we know that among other reasons, and that is that David Gilmour hired them to play his birthday party. So, especially if you remember those albums from back in the day, and, Dark Side of the Moon came out when I was in school, shall we say. And then, of course, Wish You Were Here in the Wall came out thereafter. And that basically like a 6-year period of time, Pink Floyd was so huge. They were so huge. And you got to remember, there were times when Pink Floyd didn't tour a lot. They toured some. And I remember the controversy. I think it was around the time of The Wall, where their record company really wanted them to tour. And they weren't really in the mood for that. And, you know, when you're selling as many albums as they did, don't forget that Dark Side of the Moon was, I believe, it still probably holds the record, for the length of time it spent in the Billboard Top 200 chart, because it was on there just basically forever. It was a fixture on the chart. So, an amazing show. I cannot thank the people enough of the band. And I got to thank, in particular, Dave Fowler, who is a guitar player, who sent me a note out of the blue a little over a year ago and said, hey, Steve, you don't know me, but I'm in this band called Australian Pink Floyd, and we tour. And he goes, I love watching your videos, and we're coming to town. You want to see the show for free? And I couldn't make it last year, but I made it this year, and I'm so glad I did. And I told Dave, I go, trust me, we will be meeting again, because I'm going to be seeing your show every time you're in the area, and I might travel to come see it as well. So that's how it's going to go. But the Australian Pink Floyd show absolutely blew me away. And again, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Lorelei. Thank you for everybody in the band and the crew. I met and talked to a whole bunch of them, got to see the tour bus, and it was a blast. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.